welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, is a fabulous co-host.
And it's me. You're surprised you thought it was Diana, but it's not. It's Jackie.
Logistically, if there were only going to be one co-host, the one that lives near the recording studio, like directly above it, would probably be the one. But no, twist.
We're switching things up today.
It was Jackie. Unfortunately, Diana is, we have some children schedule things.
Snafu.
So she may be joining us later, but I think she's on the road right now. She's trying to call in, which I said, I don't know how to make that work with the software we use. So let's just assume you'll get here pretty soon. Well, welcome everybody. This is not a podcast where we complain about our children's schedules and inability to use technology properly.
But wait, can we have a podcast that we just complain about children's schedules?
If it's not a true crime podcast, it is, or some sort of like weird super right-wing podcast,
right.
It is a complaining about your children podcast. Those are the three podcast
That's true, actually.
types that exist.
I love true crime. Anyway.
But it's not one of those podcasts. This is a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, in which every week we pick a topic and discuss relevant research articles related to that topic. And we were getting ready to, we were doing our production meeting, deciding what are we going to do? What's coming up the next couple of months? And I put out this really great spread because everybody knows I'm a great cook. I cook all the time. I'm really good at it.
So good.
So good at it.
This morning we went to a fishing derby and he caught the fish.
Yep. I just filleted it right in front of the kids.
A haddock.
Yeah, it was great. Delicious. Made some fish sticks. It was awesome.
JK.
But in this case, I made these elaborate bagel bites for everybody. And, Jackie went over, she touched them a few times and then said, I'm not eating that. She got really mad. Diana, she wouldn't even come near them. She stood in the corner of the room and refused to continue with the production meeting. And we all had to stop and we reflected because we're adults. And we said, this can't be the way to respond to food. Like when someone has food selectivity like this, we have to come up with some solutions. So we hit the books. And fortunately, we found somebody.
We had a montage.
It was very exciting. We're not going to show it here. But luckily, we had a special guest who was interested in this topic and has done so much research on the topic and said, yes, I will come and I will figure out your bagel bite situation. It is at the bottom of the list of importance of the research I'm doing, but sure, why not? So we have today for our episode on food selectivity, Dr. Holly Gover. Holly, thank you so much for not only coming on the show, but listening to that super long anecdote that went way longer than it should have. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm here to field any bagel bite questions for the remainder of this episode.
Oh, good, because those are the only ones I have on the list.
Great.
So
Good.
It's going to be a short episode otherwise.
Do you like regular bagels or everything bagels?
You're like, can you eat them in the morning and in the afternoon and at supper time?
I mean, as we all know, if pizza's on the bagel, you
exactly.
could eat them anytime.
Anytime. Great. So case closed.
Not sponsored by Bagel Bites at all.
Yeah, right. They should have given us some money for this one. Oh, well. So, Holly, would you mind telling our listeners who you are and how you came to be a researcher in this area?
Certainly. So, hello. My name is Dr. Holly Gover. I kind of stumbled into the field and stumbled into research by accident, and many happy accidents, as did many folks, I believe. My bachelor's degree was actually in art history and French. And so I was on a path to going and working in museums and that type of thing. And then I ended up over 10 years ago, randomly moving to Tennessee, and I needed a job. And I ended up getting a job in a life skills special education classroom. And that very first day, I just absolutely fell in love with the kids. They were so hilarious. They were so fun to hang around. They were, challenging in all their own ways, and just loved it from the moment of being in that classroom. And by way of being in that classroom, I met a behavior analyst who was a BCBA for one of the students, and ended up working for her as a direct technician, and began to just love it more the more I learned about that there was a science behind this and that type of thing. So then I ended up moving back to my home state of California and going to Cal State Northridge to get my master's. And when we were picking practicum sites, Dr. Tara Famey had a research site at a preschool, an inclusion preschool. And to me, that just seemed like a really cool spot to go get practicum hours, I wasn't even initially interested in doing research. I was like, great, let's see what this whole research thing is about. But thank goodness I did. And thank goodness that she accepted me into her research group without any experience or knowledge. And because it was just a fantastic introduction to research. And she really taught me that, really good practice should be the equivalent of doing research, given that we are, research or scientist practitioners, although of course there's still a major gap between practice and research, but just began to teach me what good applied research can be when it is melded within practice and in helping people. And so once I began getting really interested in that, in closing the research to practice gap, it led me to applying to work with Dr. Greg Hanley, who I'm biased, but I think he's one of the best applied researchers in our field. And so was able
Greg
to then...
Hanley, that name sounds familiar. Has he published anything recently or anything we might have heard of here?
I don't know. He's kind of an on the fringe type of guy. So you might not be too familiar, but ended up going and getting my PhD with him. And so got to just continue on learning about how to conduct research and how to conduct research in applied settings and solving, real world problems through, experimental questions. So led me to be where I am today.
Excellent. Very good. That's a good, I feel like I hear so many people who have such great, great histories and great research backgrounds. And they're like, I just sort of stumbled into my career, and it sort of makes me feel like I actually chose my career. Like, what am I doing wrong? Jeez.
I stumbled too. I was a stumbler as well because I didn't get into a clinical psychology program at McGill.
Oh, yeah?
That's what I wanted to do in my life.
Because you could have watched Canadian TV forever.
I know. I just wanted to go to McGill. I actually didn't want to be a clinical psychologist. I just wanted to go to McGill.
All pathways are valid. We all got here.
Right. We're all taking that journey up the mountain.
We're all on that journey.
I never got into McGill, though.
You can try again. You
it's
can
never too late.
Switch careers and be like, I have been, a doctoral level behavior analyst for, so many years, but I've decided to go back for my bachelor's in
my undergraduate
something English.
Your third act,
Like that.
All right. So we're going to be talking about 2 articles today. Jackie, what are the articles?
Can you believe I'm doing these?
No, I hope it works out okay.
This is the first time I've ever done
Don't choke. It'll be...
I know. I had a sip of water before.
You got this, Jackie.
Thank you. I'm going to start from oldest to newest, even though they're not old, because this one's from 2022 in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, and it is by Gover, Hanley, and Ruppel, and it is called On the Generality of Preference for Contingent Reinforcement.
Nice.
I love that I did that all out of order. Diana would be aghast. And the second one we're going to talk about is by Gover, Hanley, Ruppel, Landa, and Marcus. And that was published in the International Journal of Developmental Disabilities, called Prioritizing Choice and Assent in the Assessment and Treatment of Food Selectivity. And that was published in 2023. You can almost say that like 2020. 2023!
So close. So close. What'll we do in 2030 if we're still doing this podcast? It's not as much fun to say.
2030. I think it is.
No.
It rolls off your tongue.
Oh, okay. All right. So, Holly, I got to be honest. We said, let's talk about food selectivity. And one of those articles does not have food selectivity in the title,
Nope.
Talking about preferences for contingency. That's the wrong topic. Okay. Where's that one coming from?
I chose it.
You chose it.
I did.
I see. So I'm blaming Holly. I should be blaming you.
You should be blaming me.
No, I thought it's a very relevant article. I kid a bit, but what was the kind of the thought process in having that be kind of a good point of discussion before we get into the specifics of the food selectivity study?
For sure. So it was a great choice, Jackie, because we were coming up with, myself and Dr. Hanley were coming up with this topic as we were conducting the second article that we read for this episode. And it was also during the exact same time that we were also on the precipice of studying the enhanced choice model. And so in our research and practice group, we were just beginning to understand the therapeutic benefits of letting kids opt out of our treatments and giving them a choice between, would you like to come and work with us, or would you like to go get your reinforcers for free? And so that led to discussions on, are there preferences for contingent reinforcement than getting reinforcers for free? And so it seemed like a timely topic, and it seemed like a really interesting topic to me. And so that is what I selected as my lit review topic. So it's a little related. And as we get into the second article, we'll be able to, dive into it a little bit more.
So in terms of looking at the idea of contingencies and preferences for contingencies, I mean, was it a surprising finding? I mean, not to spoil the whole study, I do want us to talk more about it than just this, but was there like a surprise of, wow, humans prefer contingency? Or was it sort of one of those studies where you're like, well, we don't know for sure, but if I had to put a bet down?
To answer your question, no, we weren't surprised because, as you kind of hinted at, we went in with a hunch, specifically because Dr. Hanley had previously done research asking this question with previous students, Dr. Lazinski. So we went in with a hunch because we already knew that there was a small body of literature, of behavior analytic literature looking at this. But I'll tell you what I was surprised by and what was incredibly illuminating to me is to discover all of the varied and many conditions under which people prefer contingent reinforcement. And by that, I mean, I think going into the review, I was naive in that I thought it was going to be okay, the results will be people prefer contingent reinforcement, case closed, as if it was discovering some sort of innate thing about humans. And so it was a great reminder going through all the articles and really being able to digest them and understand the experimental preparations, in that it comes down to the environment, and it comes down to the ways in which the experimenters arranged their experiments, which contributed to the people preferring contingent reinforcement in those specific conditions. For example, some of the early studies done with humans, Singh et al., Tart et al., they literally took the basic preparations with rats and pigeons and then just put kids in those exact same scenarios, which is hilarious.
I was looking at when I was looking through the table, and I know you mentioned levers. I was like, that's got to be a typo. They didn't put kids in the lever room.
They certainly did. And so they gave kids the choice you can sit in this chair and you're going to get marbles and coins for free, or you can sit in this chair and you can lever press for coins and marbles, little trinkets. And so even just hearing about that experimental preparation and putting yourself in those kids' place, think about sitting in the chair where you're literally just sitting there and marbles are coming out, versus you're a kid and there's a lever in front of you. You're going to want to push the lever, and it's probably more fun to hit a lever and things are coming out, versus just passively sitting and receiving those reinforcers for free.
Except if you're an adult and you're tired.
You don't want to push a lever and have marbles fly out at you? That sounds pretty awesome.
I mean, it does, but it also would be nice to sit and do nothing and then have
someone throw marbles at you as well.
chocolates fall into your lap.
I mean, but exactly, you bring up a great point, Jackie, in that there's environmental variables that contribute to these preferences. There's not just some innate preference for contingent reinforcement or not. Whereas in that situation, those kids might have preferred contingent reinforcement because they were bored with how the non-contingent condition was arranged and designed. Whereas there's other studies where that isn't necessarily the mechanism behind it, where rather it is. So some of the studies were looking at the reinforcer of social attention and bids for attention. So they're looking at, would kids just want to receive attention on a time fixed schedule, or would they rather engage in a response, a contingent relation to get attention? Kids, the vast majority of kids preferred that contingent relation, which makes sense when you're thinking about the reinforcer of social attention, because there's fluctuations with motivation and satiation. So when you are playing with the toy and you want to raise your hand and be like, check this out, that, the value of attention is really high right there. So the value can match the reinforcer, versus if you're hanging and playing and just someone's coming over every 30 seconds and being like, great job, that might not be as valuable. And so in that situation, in a totally different preparation with different reinforcers, different responses, the potential mechanism behind that preference is something totally different. And so it was just really illuminating to look at all of the various potential variables and preparations that can contribute to it, that it's not just, a one and done thing, but that it's, surprise, it's the environment.
So one of the things that I want to bring up, even though it's sort of just like a component of the study, was sort of looking at the different ways that the studies that you and your co-authors reviewed these sort of, were contingencies preferred. And it seemed like the easiest ones were articles that clearly had like a concurrent chains procedure versus a concurrent operants procedure. Concurrent chains we talked about a lot on the show. Concurrent operants not as much. I'd love it if you would just mind, reminding the listeners what those two are, what they would or would not show. Concurrent chains, I think one of those procedures. I'm always surprised that not everybody is jumping on using those like nonstop. It's just like the coolest little like, oh, what if we just put we have these terminal links and we add the preference, especially when we talk about assent. I think it's more known now, but I feel like there was a period where it was sort of like, I don't know what that is. It has to be in the title of an article. It's so new.
Yeah, certainly. And it is so tied to basic research that I think it can also seem really foreign when we're talking about like initial links, terminal links, schedules, the concurrent operands type of a thing. But yeah, so the studies fell under those two ways in which they measured preference. And that was either a concurrent chains arrangement, and that is where the individuals first would make a selection independent of actually experiencing the contingency. So they might have, 3 pieces of paper in front of them. And if they hit the red one, they're going to go into a situation in which they receive contingent reinforcement. Or they might hit a different initial link, then they go into a situation in which they experience non-contingent reinforcement. So the actual reinforcement schedule is separate from the preference selections. Whereas a concurrent operants arrangement, the schedule is not necessarily separate from the actual preference measure. So you would have something like a room and it's divided in half. And if the kid goes on one side of the room, they're going to receive those reinforcers for free or on some sort of time-based schedule. But if they go on the other side of the room, they have to engage in responding to receive those reinforcers. And they're maybe getting a preference measure by duration of how long they spent on which side of the room, or how many reinforcers they collected on either side. So the measure is different, and the preparation is different. And there's kind of, pros and cons with respect to scientific rigor of why you might do one or the other. Mm-hmm. But all of the studies fell into those two camps.
Mm-hmm. So you have your studies, you have your the ranges in which you need to see a preference for contingency or not, it was a preference for contingency, right? And if it was above a certain percentage of responses, then it was, highly preferred, not, differentiation, or non-preferred. So the preference for the non-contingent schedule. And I know, we sort of have already talked about the final analysis of and contingent,
you ruined
the choosing contingencies.
Spoiler
much
alert.
higher in the percentages. And then, but I know you talked a little bit too about the kind of the differences in context. But I mean, were there any other kind of summation points in that? I know depending on the type of study, whether it was aggregate data or disaggregated data or individual participants, you got different results. So kind of some different measures there.
Yeah, an interesting finding was that the more scientifically and empirically rigorous the study was, a stronger preference for contingent reinforcement was found. Whereas when the study was a little sloppier, a little messier, and we included anything that we found that was looking into this phenomenon, either purposefully or accidentally, there tended to be more inconsistent results. And so, which is interesting in that, like, when all confounds are, addressed, that there and seemingly is an even stronger preference for contingent reinforcement, and still across various preparations. So across, when studies used a participant's own stereotypy as the reinforcer versus, like marbles and tangibles versus like social attention. So there was still a strong preference even across all of those when the studies were more refined, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I have a quick question that relates to procedures.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of students that I work with and chat with have a problem with this procedure. So I think it would be really helpful if you could clarify it for them. Don't worry, it's not a hard one. I like preference that is like, it's going to be so difficult. A lot of students have problems with yoking procedures. And I know that a lot of the studies that you looked at here have a yoking procedure. Can you explain what that is and why someone might use it?
Certainly. Yeah. So a yoking procedure is used to address a potential confound. So if you are looking at a preference between and you're comparing a contingent reinforcement condition and a non-contingent reinforcement condition, to really understand a preference for contingencies, the only difference between those two contexts is the contingency itself, meaning everything else should be equal. And that can be really hard to do. And especially if you read the paper and look at all the like many different preparations and many different reinforcers and things going on, that actually can be quite challenging to do, especially whether or not the like density and quality and quantity of reinforcement is equal across both. So that needs to be there as well. Reinforcement has to be equal across both. The only difference is the contingency. So some experimenters used yoking procedures. So for example, in a contingent reinforcement condition where a child is raising their hand to get contingent access to attention, they would measure how often that was occurring. And they would either put it into like a rate or frequency or something to that respect. So then when that participant was in the non-contingent condition, they yoked the delivery of attention to that of the schedule in the contingent reinforcement condition. So that it was matched. And something that's really interesting. So people who were really looking at this contingency preference, they almost always included yoking procedures. What was interesting too is that in the studies that did not include yoking procedures, they actually ended up having more reinforcement, more access to it, longer durations in the non-contingent reinforcement condition, which would make you think that it would tip the scales in favor of that. And even in those studies, the participants still chose contingent reinforcement, which is kind of an interesting, again, it goes back to preparation and reinforcers used. But yeah, so the yoking procedures were used to potentially address confounds related to reinforcer quality across both conditions.
Cool, thanks.
I have a related question, not related to the topic, but in terms of teaching or when you're training, when you're referring to yoking procedures, do you ever use the sort of the allusion to, say, an ox and an ox yoke, which is, I believe, where
people do.
The term,
I do sometimes.
And do the students stare at you like,
Yes.
I thought you were old, but I didn't know you were that old?
I'm like, well, back on the Oregon Trail.
You didn't die of dysentery. You had to know your ox yokes.
I did that once in an experimental class, and I had to draw it on the blackboard because everyone's like, what is that? I was like, when the two cows are together, and they're like, no. I'm like, here, I'll draw it.
This'll help.
I've lost you.
Let's switch. I'm adding the book Ox Cart
Right.
Man, the Caldecott winning book, to my syllabus, just so my students get yoking finally. It's all
finally.
Okay, thank you for humoring my question. So, Holly, when all's said and done, I'm guessing that you and your co-authors did not do this study just to well, we were curious, so we did. So we put all this together, and yeah, I guess that's what we found. Big shrug. That's the end of it, right? I mean, what can be gained from having this data, having this kind of awareness of the preference for contingency, sort of not just in a couple studies, but across a number of studies? Like, what do we do with that information now?
Yes. So one quick takeaway that one could take from it is, wow, people prefer contingent reinforcement. I should, practitioners should be empowered and inspired to go forth and arrange contingent reinforcement to teach meaningful skills that, our clients and students and everyone needs. And that certainly can be a takeaway point. But what I think is an even more important takeaway point is going back to the fact that the environment affects whether or not the people in these studies were allocating their responding to contingent reinforcement. And that's important because we arrange environments and we arrange learning contexts. And so rather than just going forth and being like, great, I'm just going to employ all contingent reinforcement conditions, rather, if we actually allow kids and students and clients a choice between the two, it'll actually affect how we're arranging our contingent reinforcement context and learning context, in that we can and should be doing everything that we can to make it more fun, to make it more valuable, to make it more enjoyable to engage with, such that even if given the choice to go get reinforcers for free, they would still rather come engage in contingent learning opportunities with us, with the teacher, with the professional. And that really gets to the work that we've done with the enhanced choice model, and then some of the procedures that we employed in the feeding study that we read. And so I think that's an even bigger takeaway. It's that really what we do, our arranging can affect whether or not our clients want to come engage in contingent reinforcement. And we can do something about that. And there's many different, tools and variables at our disposal. So really, we should be working hard to design those environments.
All right. Well, speaking of designing an environment that allows for choice and also it results in a significant, change in a behavior, let's talk about your food selectivity research. Before we get into sort of what you and your colleagues did for food selectivity, what was sort of the state of treating, feeding, and food selectivity prior to your study? Like, what was going on at the time of that prep?
For sure. So at the time, and I was a new BCBA. I had just come from being an in-home BCBA in California and working with families, providing ABA services. And across the board, every single one of my families was like, can you please help us with picky eating? Can you please help us with, he's only eating Cheetos and I can't get him to try any vegetables and, what have you. And so when I went to the literature as a new BCBA, I primarily found, and it's one of our most well-researched procedures, but escape extinction procedures for eating issues. And unfortunately, the types of clients that I was working with didn't always match the types of clients in those publications. My clients didn't have life-threatening feeding disorders. They were just eating McDonald's. And I was working in homes and I was a new BCBA. And so certainly not trained in those procedures. And wouldn't feel comfortable implementing them, one, without training, of course, but then two, in homes with parents. And so that, from my vantage point, was the work out there. That was what was available to behavior analysis or analysts. And there was also, pretty simple reinforcement strategies. So several times I would be like, all right, I got a bag of Skittles. Let's try a piece of broccoli and I'll give you Skittles, which also was just never helpful and didn't feel good. And so that from my vantage point at this time, my read of the literature was what was kind of out there. And so it was actually Greg Hanley who wanted to put together this line of research. And because he had previously done feeding research back in his early career with Dr. Kathleen Piazza. And so I signed right up and I was like, please, I would love to take the lead on this. Give me this project. I would love to take it on. And so we started putting together this feeding program based on what was available to practitioners at the time. And with a majority of practitioners just likely needing some more vetted options for working with kids with eating issues. Mm-hmm.
And so you were still relatively kind of early on in your BCBA journey when you started doing this initial kind of work with feeding selectivity.
Yep. I was a pretty newly minted BCBA when I joined the PhD program, and we started working on this right away. And I continued working on it through the entire duration of my PhD.
So what were some of the precautions that you wanted to make sure you took, both as something that was, new to you in terms of your own scope of competence? You were looking at treatments that, nothing in this paper jumped out as I've never heard of this before. What sort of, witchcraft is being put? These are all very well documented treatments. However, maybe not in this exact configuration. So I know we're always very wary. We haven't done a lot of episodes on feeding to talk about the, potential for risk, because we're, severe problem behavior, you definitely have that same issue. But if we're talking about reading interventions, I'm not great at reading interventions. What's the worst that happens is you waste everybody's time. Maybe the client says, I don't want to read with you anymore. You're bad at this. But with feeding, we're really talking about something that one needs nutrition to live. So what were some of the extra precautions you were really wary of in terms of preparing this?
For sure. So we definitely took a lot of precautions before jumping into evaluating this. And that was, we wanted to be sure that the first group of kids that we were working with were selective eaters, and they did not fall on the spectrum of total food refusal. So we wanted to be assured that they were safe oral feeders, so that they already chewed and swallowed food, that they already ate, a variety of foods. So they were safe eaters. And we did this by having parents get a note from their doctor to sign off on that a behavioral intervention would be appropriate for these kids, and that there was no other medical medical issues contributing to their food selectivity. So we were assured that all of the kids initially coming into this were safe oral feeders. We made sure that we had like all their medical information, allergy information. We had a nurse on staff, not on staff, but we were in a university setting. And so she was there whenever we were running it. If we ever needed anything, we were all CPR certified, that type of thing. So there was certainly a lot of like front end risk management steps that we engaged in. And then there was also parts of the process that also helped mitigate risk as well.
Yeah. So I do like to say, and I always say this for any of the feeding things that we've done so far, is that we are not trained to work with swallowing or chewing as behavior analysts. That is a speech problem.
Yeah.
And so if kids are having issues with that, you do not do that as a behavior analyst. You
Absolutely
bring it right
not.
on over to the speech people. That's why they're there. That's why we can collaborate. But we've had a few listeners email in and be like, how do you do this? I'm like, you don't actually.
Yep.
That's not you. That's speech. Bring it on over there, right? We have different domains. So I know 100%. You didn't do that, but I just like to.
No, thank you, Jackie. And this is a great realm in which we can have so much really fruitful collaboration with other professionals, because there's so many interlocking things going on with whether you want to talk to a nutritionist or a dietitian or, like getting in an SLP and OT who have experience with feeding issues is like a great collaboration opportunity, especially working on this.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
Hey everyone, sorry to interrupt the show, but I wanted to remind you that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. By listening to the show, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening and then go to abainsidetrack.com to find the Get CEUs link. You can also find that link in your show notes on your podcast player. You'll need some key information, including 2 secret code words that we've hidden in the episode. This first one is Nightingale, Nightingale. It's a bird. There's also like an old fairy tale, which I remember. Y'all remember Shelley Duvall's fairy tale theater? There was one about the story of the Nightingale starring Mick Jagger. But I believe he was supposed to be playing like a Japanese emperor, so it's probably a canceled episode right now. It definitely is not on the air as it was made in the 80s, the early 80s. But anyway, just remember Nightingale.
I always think of Florence Nightingale.
You could also do that. All right, back to our show. I definitely appreciated, one thing I really appreciated about this study, Holly, is because, like you were saying, there's that middle ground of these aren't, the children who were just sort of doing the developmental, I don't want to eat this. And then eventually you just don't make a big deal about it and they start eating whatever's on their plate.
Yes.
This is not the need to be hospitalized for, severe lack of gaining weight, need multiple medical professionals following the case. These are just those, I eat a number of things, possibly even from different food groups, but it's the same every time. Or I eat a lot of things, but if it's not the things I'm used to, I might have problem behavior at mealtime problem behavior. And I know working in schools, I'll see a lot of times, families who are, the child is thriving, they're doing fine health-wise, but just like hearing them talk about mealtime, it sounds like just the worst experience. And usually mealtime is one of those great times the family gets together where, oh, you should have that. That's great for your family. If you don't have enough meal times at the table, your children will grow up to become, terrible humans. It's very important. And it's always been this fear of like, well, I'm not trained to do that. I can't treat it like your child will die if I don't do this, but it's also not something that we could sort of just, you just keep putting it on the plate and they'll eventually eat the peas, or because you get the sense they've already done all of it, or they tell you, I have done all of this. It's that odd middle ground. So it was definitely nice to see a study for that middle ground and treatment for that middle ground where one could say, it's too hard. I don't have the training. I can't do it, or dismiss it potentially. So
absolutely. And you bring up a great point too on with these kind of like middle tier cases and kids, it's like who decides if there's a problem? And in my history, and since the working with the kids in the current study that we read and thereafter, to me, the parents decide if it's a problem. And so I've worked with clients that this little girl, she only ate like chicken nuggets and French fries, but her mom had a whole host of other things to worry about. And she's like, that is not a priority for me. And I'm going to feed her chicken nuggets and French fries every day and pizza for breakfast. I don't care. And so to me, I'm like, great, no judgment. Like it's up to you, like what battles you want to fight as a parent. And so for her, she was not interested in working on, food selectivity. But for others, if they decide it's a problem, if it's disordering their life in a way that is, causing, just these stress, these mealtime battles, then it's a problem. And so I think parents really driving whether it's a problem or not is really important to also the success of it.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was one of the participants' backgrounds or if it was in the introduction, but I know mentioning like going to birthday parties or going to any function with food, I know my child's going to have a tantrum where we can't stay, we're not able to. Yeah. So, I mean, it can become, even though it's not necessarily a health risk, it can become just very limiting.
And I actually worked with this one family, and we worked with all three of their siblings, all three of their kids, and they actually ate like semi-healthy food, but the mom had to prepare 3 different meals a night, and they did not eat any junk food or kid food. They didn't eat hot dogs. They didn't eat pizza. They didn't eat cupcakes. Oh,
that's hard, man. That's so hard.
Exactly, Jackie. Exactly.
You just want to have the pizza, right? Like on hand. You don't want to like go and.
I'm exhausted. I just threw it on the cookie sheet and I heated it up and it's done. Please eat. Yeah.
You literally nailed it. The parents were like, we just sometimes want to buy a pizza on a Friday night. And they had to bring a cooler to birthday parties because they knew that they wouldn't eat pizza, and so that's such like a great example that this isn't about like getting kids to eat vegetables. This isn't about like, creating healthier eaters in that realm. It's certainly important for some kids, and it's certainly part of the whole process, but really it's about trying to create contexts in which kids like can be more flexible with their eating habits. Like we all have food preferences. There's foods that I don't like. There's foods I don't eat and prepare, but if someone prepared it for me, like I could eat it, and so food flexibility can be really important to just, thriving in various environments. And so to me, even still working with clients and with groups, I think like making sure people are not too focused on getting them to eat the 5 foods that we picked for the program. That's not the point. The point is like, let's like create some more like flexible eaters. Let's create more like fun and space around all of this.
Right.
So Holly, when looking at the goals of the study, I mean, certainly the primary goal is you have selective eaters that you would like to help learn to be more flexible with what they can eat. But were there other goals too? Because I know when I read papers, you're reading something that's, maybe 3 years after half that work has been done. Yes. And you're reading it. There's a lot of, the purpose was, we're going to put together a package and we have an assessment. Was that always the plan? Like, let's put this all together and make something really, really wonderful and awesome. Or did that sort of come about as you were looking at your results? It's like, wait a minute, we have this like new technology we sort of all put together.
Yeah. So truly, when we very first put this together, our honest question was like, would this work? Mm-hmm. Can we get kids to eat food that they, seemingly don't want to eat? And so that was the initial question. Like, can we do it in a way that's fun, that's relaxed, that they even might enjoy doing? And could we still do it? Because we kind of really didn't know. We were like, we were even planning like on some point, like, will escape extinction be necessary? Will like some modified version of it be necessary? Like, will we have to like sit them at the table until they're done? You know, so we really went in like slightly blind with respect to that. However, after the first few kids went through it, it was honestly just so eye-opening what can happen when you give kids really meaningful choices. And so again, we were working on this around the same time that we were also starting to do some enhanced choice model work. And it was actually a feeding client that was the first client that we used an enhanced choice model procedure with. And it was the kid in the study. His name's Liam. And one day he wanted to leave my session. And of course I was like, excusez-moi, like, what do I do? He wants to leave. And so did, like kind of an old school ABA thing where I'm like, gently blocking the door and being like, okay, just let me know when you're ready. Let me know when you're ready. So funny to think back on the things, the ways in which we used to ABA. And so when we brought it to our weekly research meeting, he like posing it as a problem, like, what do I do? Like, he wanted to leave the session. Greg, in all his wisdom, was like, well, let him leave. And it was, kind of shocking at the time, like, clutching our pearls, like, what? Like, we can't let kids leave the treatment. They'll never come back, which, going back to the point on preference for contingencies, like, that's a problem. If we're fearful that they won't come back, then there's something wrong with this, not the procedure. So anywho, we were like, all right, like, it's kind of crazy, but let's try it. And the second that we allowed kids to opt out and gave them the option to opt out, even before any like challenging behavior or precursors occurred, just like, hey, this space is available to you at any point in time, it really took out so much tension, so much friction. Any precursors or challenging behavior like immediately was kind of wiped out because we were just giving them like another lever to press, we're like, you can like engage in this with us at the table. You can, hightail out of here, or you can go like, just take a beat and we'll let you. And so it ended up beginning like a whole new line of research in this like assent-based learning. And I think that's really some of the coolest stuff that's come from it. And I think it's absolutely instrumental for many kids for whom control is a major issue with food, because like other things, like peeing, pooping, there's some other things out there. Like, you can't make a kid eat something. As hard as you might try, as hard as some of our parents might have tried, that is something that you cannot, technically fully prompt through. And so a lot of our kids came in just like, like staunch, like digging their heels in, and they're like, not doing that. And so I think you have to relinquish control with those kids, and you have to just, give them meaningful choice in those situations to like take out all the tension. And so it's been just incredibly influential, like on my practice to design, and implement and program for those opportunities.
I also like thinking about when you're programming for food selectivity and these more hard skills, like, what would I want to see for my own kid, right? I wouldn't want someone to be sitting in front of them with a spoon and being like, take a bite, take a bite, take a bite. Like that, for me, it's like a little unnerving, right?
Yeah, I mean, unless it's a matter of life and death, that's a sort of procedure. Right? It's like, well, at best, your child will be like, I will do this until I am old enough to get out of here. And then you think I'm coming to your birthday dinner.
Yeah, so I mean, like, thinking about that way, I know that's changed my perspective a lot in some programming. Like, if it's something that I wouldn't do for my own kid if they weren't eating whatever, then I probably shouldn't do it for my kids and my clients, unless it's a life event, right? So that's completely different, right? We're not talking about that. But if it's about like varying foods, they're not dying, right? Then I would want to try something that they'd be happy about. And most people are not happy about non-contingent removal of the spoon, right? Although it's very effective in some ways, it doesn't really have great, like, the kids are like, I love it when people do that.
I don't know if they've ever done that assessment where they're like, do you want to do the spoon in your face? And,
certainly.
Because with extinction, you do have side effects, right? Which are emotional responding, those types of things. So,
and there are so many, and it kind of like depends like what lens you're looking through for how we address problems. And, typically with challenging behavior, that's through a functional analysis, and you design a function-based treatment. So if you are looking at, isolated reinforcers. And if the reinforcers escape, then you're looking at a compliance issue. And so the way to respond to it is to, disallow escape when they're engaging in, XYZ behavior and, following through. And that's how a lot of times that we've addressed escaped maintained behavior. However, I think we know that like life is just so much more complicated than that. And there's so many variables that come into play, even if, of course, not eating the food is the main thing. Like we're dealing with like a behavioral deficit here. So of course, like escape and avoidance is driving the bus, but it's great to ask like why as well and to understand like the nuances because every case is so different. And what's really neat about using, like shaping and gradually reinforcing approximations towards chewing and eating the foods is that with every single kid, you're kind of able to diagnose what the problem is, like what their why is. So for example, Luke in the study, he like flew through the process. His like graph has the least amount of trials. He flew through like in 8 days. I bet we could have done it in 1 day had we, like had him there for a few hours, but we just saw these kids 3 hours a week. His like really was about the control. It was about like sticking it to his mom and not eating the foods that she wanted him to eat. And so he was just like an immediate no, like he wouldn't get near it. He wouldn't touch it. He'd scream if he saw them. He couldn't even, like if he smelled it, he would start like pretending to gag. Like he was just like, ugh. And so the second that we gave him all the choice in the world, we let him pace it. There was no timers. The second that he was engaging in the process and started touching these foods to his tongue, he was like, oh, this is pretty good. It's delicious. And he started eating the foods like that. And so that is one case in which it's like, it seemed like it was like the avoidance and the escape was like really, influenced by this control influence. Whereas another kid in the study, Allie, we had to add a whole bunch of shaping steps for her. And her process is a lot longer because she actually was having some like pretty like visceral respondent reactions to the food. Like the first time she was picking up mac and cheese, like she was like shuddering because she was like, oh, this like gooey mac and cheese is so gross. And the moment she started putting things like near her mouth, touching it to her tongue, her teeth, she was gagging in the presence of these foods. So her, why is so different than Luke's. And so hers was really like a desense program in which we were working through respondents with her to be able to, enjoy those foods. So yeah, there's just a whole host of reasons why kids are escaping and avoiding food. And we certainly never looked at it as a compliance issue. And so I think that really changes the way that you address a problem.
So looking at the procedures in a little more detail, Holly, you started with practical functional assessment. So you did an open-ended interview with the parents. You did an ISCA to sort of look for the synthesized reinforcement contingency that would sort of, turn on, turn off the mealtime problem behavior was kind of what you were mostly looking for. There was some challenging behavior, but it was mostly kind of, pretty, the low end.
Quite minor. Yep.
Yeah. I just, because I'm a fan of the PFA procedure, and you mentioned there was a modified open-ended interview. How was it modified? Was it sort of just modified to be more food-based than, the typical kind of beginning interview, or were there other specific questions that just weren't covered?
Yep. I think with this initial batch of kiddos that went through this, it was almost exactly that, but questions about food embedded within it. And so, already addressing any mealtime challenging behavior, everything is already pretty narrowed for you. You already know what the EOs are. You already, and you're mostly like, you're often identifying, like what are the reinforcers? What are they doing when they're not eating the food that you'd like them to? And so you kind of can get like straight to the point. It's a lot easier than doing a practical functional assessment process for challenging behavior, which I think has a lot more complexities, and designing it, you have to consider a lot of variables. Whereas it's like, well, we got the context. It's meal times. It's either snack, lunch, dinner. And so we just asked like follow-up questions about like, what do meal times look like? We've modified it even since then to start to ask like more questions, like to see if we can do any sort of that kind of like diagnosing on the front end, to be like, what are they willing to do with food? Like when was there a preceding event that seemed to precede the food selectivity? Because sometimes parents have like the exact story. And it's like, they got the flu, they were vomiting for 2 weeks. And thereafter food became, really aversive because they're like, every time I put food in my body, I threw up. So sometimes there's like really specific events that might influence like how quickly we plan to shape or like what shaping steps you add in there. And so now I'm sure to ask a lot of more questions now that I've done this many, many more times. So.
Sure. Now, the procedure itself had the choice. The kids could come to the table. They could go engage with the moderately preferred items and some attention. I'm guessing that just meant like if they tried to interact with you, you'd interact with them briefly. You weren't trying to ignore them, something like that.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
How did you decide that you wanted the kind of the hangout to be that versus to be exactly the same as the tabletop situation where they had access to all the attention and all the good stuff, all the things, right?
When we designed these procedures, it was like immediately before the enhanced choice model. Mm-hmm. And so in our minds at that point, if the child was engaging in any precursors at the table, we decided to give them escape for free. Mm-hmm. So that's essentially what it was based on. But then we certainly didn't want them to just like go stand in the corner by themselves. So we're like, let's just put some things over there. Let's put a beanbag chair. Let's put books. Let's like have it be like a cozy break station, a little calm down corner that's in like so many schools and stuff like that. So it really was like, over there, you can get escape for free, but we're not going to just like give you nothing. Like we'll put some cozy things over there. And then it's your space to go to whenever you feel like things are getting too hard. If ever, you're too scared to do something, that's, your space over there. So at the time we weren't, thinking about it with respect to kids might actually prefer like contingently engaging in this behavior to receive those reinforcers versus getting them for free, which is why then when we started moving into an enhanced choice model and adding these components into that, we were like, yeah, I bet they would still actually choose the practice context. So there we were actually like, let's not even deprive them of all the things. They can actually just have all the things. So later we moved towards making those like more matched than with the feeding clients.
And were they matched in the sense of Hangout had what was at the table, or they could just bring the stuff from the table to Hangout and back?
There was things already in the Hangout corner with the feeding kids, the moderately preferred things.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, I really loved how the setup for sort of the initial baseline to sort of just get a sense of where the kids would come in terms of really allowing for that ascent process throughout. So, I mean, they could always just say nuts to this and go to Hangout and blow off the whole research project.
Indeed.
But you also included so many great visuals that kind of gave them even more choice about what are you willing to do, which then also was linked into, okay, and where will I deliver the maximal amount of contingent reinforcement based on if I'll do this, all right, then we'll start here, and this level is the good reinforcement. One below, I think it was 1 or 2 below, you're still good. Go below that, it was moderate. To eventually, if it's like, well, if you want to come and just sit and stare at food, like you've done better than that. I'm not going to. I'll chat for a few minutes. It's not going to be that big a deal. But would you mind kind of describing like where that came from with the visual, kind of what it looked like when the kids did decide to come over?
Yeah, sure. So our baseline procedure. So we used the trial by trial data from the functional analysis as kind of like an initial baseline when the EO specifically was like, here, take a bite or try this. And so it was kind of our baseline measure for the occurrence of any precursors or challenging behavior. But then we also wanted to do a baseline in which when they had complete control over their behavior, if they had complete control over getting to do whatever they wanted to do with the food, like where were they comfortable making that commitment response? And so baseline is also where we were able to teach them the rules of the game and the procedures and make sure they understood. And so they would come to the table, they had a visual board, and it was listing all of the various things that you could do with the food, from looking at it, touching the plate, touching the food, all the way up to chewing and swallowing it. So we're like, here's all the things you could do with it. During baseline, all of those things were signaled to the child with green. So there was either like a green sticker next to it or like a green card behind the visual. And so we're like, so if it's green, you get to do whatever you want. So really you can do anything. And so these were the kids that went through this initially were kids who could learn through instruction, who could learn through, us sitting there and describing the procedures. So really there didn't need to be any exposure to the contingencies or anything with this set of kids. Rather, we could be like, so here, like, look, it's a nose. Like, if you smell it, that's what that looks like. And we maybe like showed them a few things, but really they were kids who were like, okay, got it. But baseline allowed them to just experience the program in that they're going to choose a food, and there's 5 or 6 foods that they're choosing from. That food then is going to get placed in front of them, and we're not instructing them what to do with it. They get to decide what to do with it. So already we're just setting up the kind of like power structure between us and the kid, in that like you can do whatever you'd like with it. So you can even look at it. It's all good. Like, it's there's no grudge holding. There's no like trying to nudge them in one direction. Like, it kind of just is what it is. And so we even stay in baseline until we're like, okay, they fully got it. They get it, before moving on to begin implementing differential reinforcement. And then their responding lets us know where to start, like where are they the most comfortable. And so that's the level that we begin shaping up at.
Kind of one thing that I know it seems to vary, and again, as more of a reader of this line of research, the publication date doesn't necessarily mean anything related to when the treatment came into place, versus other treatments that have been like similar and similar components. But was there a thought about, because I know there were sort of rules about, we eat this many bites, you touch this many, wherever they were comfortable when this happens. This is the contingency, putting that in place. Was there ever a discussion of whether the contingency would be more randomized? So it's like, you never know how many bites, if you're willing to bite, that's great. I can't tell you how many you have to have. It could be 2, it could be 5. Or was it always, it's going to be a set number and we'll tell them what that is and just be honest about it?
That is a super question, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of relating to like an unpredictable schedule of reinforcement. Earlier
temporarily to, the publication date of this most recent article, there is more of that focus on randomization.
Yeah.
However, now that we're getting to actually hear the story of the creation, these participants were going through some of those steps when they had not been maybe codified quite as, specifically.
Right. Well, yeah, it's a great question. And I know that people have since implemented those types of procedures into it. So randomizing a little bit more. And I know that people have also directly embedded it into skill-based treatment processes, where the behavior change that they're teaching the kids are these shaping steps. And so similar to skill-based treatment procedures, the schedule of reinforcement there is intermittent and unpredictable, in that in every trial, they might not know what it might be, but we're still increasing over time. And so I've seen people do that in practice, and I think it works out pretty well. I think the only downside to it is that it will take longer, and similar for SBT. So if you're kind of like going back and doing trials at lower levels, like it's going to necessitate more trials. And we found that unlike shaping like cooperation with like academic demands or whatnot, shaping up cooperation with all these things related to eating and eventually getting to chewing and swallowing the food is a little different, because you have some like natural reinforcers on your side. Almost all of our kids ended up liking some of the foods that we targeted. And so for some of them, some foods, even at the end, were still hard for them. It was still challenging. They didn't want to do it, but they would, all right, I'll do it. But for others, they're like, this is great now. I'm going to keep on eating it. And so we initially didn't program any intermittent unpredictable reinforcement procedures, but I know people that have in practice and have had like great success with it. And so it wasn't something that we did at the time, but I've seen it done.
But so it may not be relevant to, it may not need to be a component either way. It may just kind of
either way. Yeah. But it's not wrong, to do so.
So Holly, when you were kind of working with the participants, I know, like you mentioned, Allie was one of them, where she sort of got to a point in the demand fading steps where she started gagging, maybe making more kind of statements. How did you decide whether you were going to, because I think one of the participants, you went back a step and sort of started again. I think with Allie, like you said, you just broke down the steps. I mean, did it really come from some of those initial kind of interviews, or just having worked with your participants for so long that you kind of had a sense of, I think her issue is more that, like you said, it's a desensitization issue versus perhaps the other participant, it was more, I think if we just try it again and just give more time? Or was it we just picked one and it happens to work?
I'm trying to kind of think back in those like day-to-day decision making, but it was based off of the presence of like challenging behavior precursors or gagging or, and any of those like respondent type of reactions. And also things that we didn't measure that's not on the graph. We could only fit so much. We fit a lot in those graphs.
Yeah. The graphs are like, scary, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, you got to like spend some time with them.
I think anyone who's worked with Greg and is now publishing, it's like, come on, you're making everyone else look bad. Like you need this many graphs. They're very cool. They're very cool.
Every single thing the kid did is in there, trial by trial. There's zero aggregation. It's like what the kid did across the entire intervention is in there. So I recommend printing it out, getting it nice and big in front of you and checking it out.
And then spending the night with some wine.
Just going through.
Looking at individual data symbols because there's other things that they were doing too. Like they were like talking to us about it. Like, and Allie, she would like even kind of like shudder sometimes. Like we were not measuring shuddering, and so sometimes they were like just talking to us, but it wasn't, meeting the definition of a verbal protest or whatnot. And so honestly, we were making decisions based on their behavior of like what we thought might be helpful in that situation because we didn't want them to flounder for too long. And I think after these first 3 moving on, I like barely let the kids flounder at all. Almost like on one trial, if I'm like, they're having a problem, I almost need to be like, all right, give them a few trials. They might be able to do this because I want to just immediately jump in and be like, what do you need? Like we can break this down. We can try it in a different way. And so those decisions were based on that type of stuff. So like, whereas Allie, we knew that we had to break something down when she was trying a higher level and then couldn't complete it. So the very first time we jumped up to swallowing the food, she was like, I'm ready. And she like hit swallow. She, put the food in her mouth and she's chewing and she's chewing and she's chewing and she's chewing. And then she starts getting more nervous. And then she's like, I can't do it. And, spits it out and tries again and again and again. So she's trying to, but she just had this like mental block. Like she just like couldn't do it. And I just felt for her so much because like I've been there. The first time I had an oyster, I was like, this puppy's not going down. Like
you just got to get the cocktail saw and just get it right down. Don't think about it too much.
Sitting there just like, oh God, I literally physically can't swallow this. And so for her, because she was trying and couldn't do it, we're like, we need to break down the skill. Just staying at this level is not going to help her because she already tried it. And then she was out. She was like, I'm done. And then she just started picking low ones. And she's like, I'm out. I'm not eating any of this food anymore. And so we even like lost her for a moment. And we ended up having to go back and doing like really like creative shaping to get her there. And it really it helped out and worked for her. For Liam, he's one that he was like our very first kid who went through it. And so we've learned so much since then. Whereas for him, we just started shaping. And when we like ran into a roadblock, we're like, all right, let's go back to the previous level. And so we did. Yeah. And you see us like go back there, like for the longest time, he's still kind of like intermittently gagging with some of the foods. And we're like, all right, should we just put it back up now? Because there were like at least a few meals where he like wasn't gagging again. So we're like, okay, I think he's ready. So we like bumped it back up and it was still kind of messy. And so from him, we learned like, and I think we put this like a note of this in the discussion, like we always recommend like task analyzing it. I think you're rarely going to get anything from just going back to a previous step. Right. I think rather thinking about like, what is the challenges with that step they're having and like getting creative with the ways that you can actually task analyze that step has always been way more helpful.
Yeah. So moving forward, just slower or at a different component of the step.
Yeah.
That's good. Thank you, Ha. I appreciate you kind of going through that one. I know it's been a while, but I think that is, again, one of the components that, looking at kind of that enhanced choice model piece, it's still relatively new. So it's very exciting to get to hear sort of the genesis of that, because I know certainly for a lot of, maybe it's just me, but I would assume other practitioners, you read an article and you're like, all right, this is it. These people are smart. They know what they're doing. And then, 2 months later, you see another publication where they do something different. You're like, well, which one am I supposed to do? And the answer is like, you probably could do either one, or there's probably some reason that this one does it this way and this one does it that way, but they don't have space to just put all the anecdotes into the article. So I think it's always very helpful to get that background information to sort of, and also to just see the thought process rather than like, no, we knew what it would look like. It was this, and nothing ever went wrong. And we published, like a month later. It was real fast, shockingly.
I mean, you're so right, because these kids went through this during my doc program. So that was like 2017 and to like 2019. And we've replicated across so many kids now, kids without a ton of great language, like older kids, like adults, like people in residential settings, and have learned so much that I can't necessarily like pack it into this article, even though it just came out this year, because we have to like report the story that we were telling with those 3 cases. But you're so right. It's really unfortunate how slowly research moves, which is why I think it's also great to have like these conversations to, just like remind practitioners that to be flexible with everything that they're reading, and to know that, everything should be based off of your clients and their performance. And we should learn to be nimble and be able to pivot with our procedures.
So in the end, you had 3 participants who were eating lots of foods. You were able to extend the mealtime preparation to the parents. That was kind of those last steps of the demand fading, where the bites versus just the trying it and the smelling it and all that. And you never needed to use escape extinction. The enhanced choice model was in effect. The hangout was in effect. The kids weren't choosing it very much. They seemed to overall, by continuing to come back to the table, show that they liked this treatment. And the end. And then the parents went off and were happy, and hopefully forever. And could go to birthday parties and everything. I think that is probably a good place to bring us into dissemination station. Oh, we're here. So, we've already sort of talked about the fact that even though this is a new article, these are older data. So, usually we ask the question like, what's next for this line of research? And I'm sure there's still questions about this line of research, but some of the ones that I probably would have jumped at from just reading the article, you may have already answered. So sort of what more is known about this package than was when you did the study, and what would still be next?
Great. So I think what we've learned from this initial study is how to be nimble and flexible with the procedures with a variety of learners. And what I get the most questions about, and I hope we can publish soon on one day, is like, what about the kids that you can't explain the procedures to? Like, what about the kids who can't learn through instruction? And what we've really learned is like, so we have this like whole treatment package. There's so many bells and whistles in it. But really at the base of it, the bones of this is shaping, differential reinforcement, and assent-based learning. I think those are the most important parts of this, and synthesized reinforcement, not using like isolated reinforcers for doing all these challenging things with food. And so really, when working with any learner, we've just stripped it away of any bells and whistles that don't benefit the child. And so if they're not understanding how to make choices with a board, if they're not understanding, different levels of reinforcement, we just strip away until they're like contacting reinforcement, understanding the contingency, understanding what we're asking of them. And so that might just involve modeling. There might be no board at all, but always at the base of it, you can do assent-based learning with any client, student, whatever, even who don't have great communication skills. And so I think we've really without, doing a formal component analysis, are starting to understand like what are the actual mechanisms that make this process successful. And that's not to say that all the bells and whistles can't be therapeutic too for certain kids who can benefit from like, I love having a board and I like to make choices and whatnot. But have really understood like the bones, the foundation of the treatment. And really where I'm quite excited to go next. One, we have some papers under review right now for incorporating trauma-informed care strategies into feeding treatments.
Makes sense.
Even trying to go further with respect to allowing like meaningful choices and shared governance. So recently worked with a 12-year-old and designed the treatment with him and gave him like complete autonomy over like when we were running sessions, like what food we were going to target. And so to really try to incorporate even more strategies that just promote autonomy and self-determination for our clients, especially those who can speak up for themselves and let you know what they think about their picky eating and whatnot. And so really excited about that future line of research. And lastly, I think I going back to like, in that the goal of this was not to get the kids to eat the food, although that was the main dependent variable. So the results are we got the kids to eat the food. I really want to know, like, I want to capture, did we actually address food selectivity in that? are the kids more flexible now? And so I want to get a little bit more creative with pre-assessment assessments and measuring like their willingness to interact with the food. And then thereafter, are they more willing to interact with food across different contexts, meals with their parents, out at a restaurant? Maybe they're not going to like sit and eat like a spinach salad, but do they now know more things they can do with the food? Since they already like worked on, this cheese, are they willing to like try the feta cheese? So I'm really interested in capturing, generalization effects of the treatment, because I've heard some of it reported by parents. Other parents have had a really tough time going forth and implementing these procedures and did not see generalized effects. So it's been really different across kids. And so it'd be great to capture and understand, the boundary conditions of how effective is this truly in a meaningful way beyond here, pre-post. They weren't eating the food, now they're eating the food. So excited to, dive into those types of procedures.
Yeah. And then you also get the confound of, and I don't consider myself a picky eater, but if I go to certain restaurants, that context, what am I going to order? Well, the thing I ordered the last time I was here 2 years ago because I liked it. And if you just looked at that one moment, you're like, oh, that picky eater. He just orders every time he comes to this restaurant. It's like, man, I haven't been here 2 years. I really liked it. Like, what are you going to, So how much does that change? My kids, if there's chicken fingers on the menu, they order the chicken fingers.
Of course.
Oh,
Absolutely.
But they're known for their steaks and pasta. I would eat steak and pasta, but I will not order it right now.
Not when that's available. Yeah.
Hot dog chicken fingers.
Hot dog chicken. What the heck is that?
When people get hot dogs and chicken fingers.
Oh, and chicken fingers. I thought
together.
It was like they battered
hot dog, chicken finger
with the chicken finger.
Actually, delicious. I don't like either of those, but man,
it's like almost a corn dog, but there's a lot of chicken involved.
Yeah.
It's like
ooh, inventing new food.
Yeah.
There's a confound. It's going to destroy the whole study. No one would eat this. We broke down all the steps, and they wouldn't accept it.
No one wants to eat the hot dog and chicken nugget.
Well, Holly, thank you so much for coming on the show. I love kind of hearing about this, and I wasn't crazy. It was good to hear that I wasn't crazy in terms of I started reading your article and saying, wait a minute, this just seems like enhanced choice model skills-based training, but food is the cab. That's architecturally appropriate behavior.
Yes.
Okay, good.
You're not crazy with respect to that. Maybe you're crazy with other things. I don't know.
It's possible. Yeah, it does not prove anything, but it does disprove anything, but it doesn't prove it either. So, Dr. Holly Gover, if folks would like to reach out to talk about these lines of research, the food selectivity package, anything else having to do with enhanced choice, is there a place that they could contact you?
Certainly. And absolutely. So my email, you can probably like Google me too. And there's like, probably my email is out there. Google me.
That's how I found your email.
Perfect.
I could have called you and asked you, but
it's holly.gover@vumc.org. I work at Vanderbilt University Medical Center now with the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center. And please feel free to reach out because I have a lot of materials that I would be happy to send you. We have the protocol completely written out. I have examples of data sheets, different types of boards and visuals that we've used. And I am always happy to send those anyone's way if they're interested in those. So please feel free to reach out, email me, and I'd be happy to share materials.
We want to say a big thanks to Dr. Holly Gover for being on the show today. It's always such a pleasure to get to talk about, I think, these packages of interventions. And I think this was fun. And we appreciate that she let us ask a lot of nitty gritty detail that didn't find its way into the research paper. So thank you very much, Dr. Gover. All right. Well, we couldn't wrap up the show without our final segment, pairings.
Oh, hello. It's me, Diana. I'm here just in time for pairings. So in this segment, I like to tell you about other episodes that you might want to potentially go back and listen to if you found this one interesting. And so today, my recommendations are that you go and check out episode 44, in which we discuss feeding. Episode 57, which is titled, Do Humans Prefer Contingencies? ? And that reviews a lot of these various concurrent chains and concurrent operant arrangement literature. You could also check out episode 204, in which we discussed applications of trauma-informed care with Dr. Deetu Rajaraman. Or you could check out episode 231, which is technically titled Emotional and Behavioral Disorder Intervention, but it also reviews a lot of components of the PFA package. So you might want to review that and check it out if you're interested to learn more about that. And that was with Dr. Joey Staubitz.
And the enhanced choice model as well.
And the enhanced choice model. Yes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I also recommend a snack to go with your listening. And so the reason why I'm only now jumping in here today is because I don't know if you guys reviewed this already. I'm sure it was
We did.
It was a big hubbub.
Yes.
That I wasn't
It's all we
here.
talked about the whole episode.
I apologize. I am very sorry. And I was prepared for this episode and excited to talk about it, but I couldn't come due to some scheduling challenges that we had with our family. I was at the ball field. So the snack for today is Cracker Jack. You remember Cracker Jack?
Yeah.
Yep. Because you can go
You get a prize.
buy it, take me out to the ball game.
Mhm.
Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. It's not that good. I had some recently.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Fiddle faddle. That's where it's at.
Cracker Jack tastes like it's was made stale from the beginning.
Mhm.
Fiddle faddle is good. Crunch and munch is good.
Mhm.
So, but anyway, enjoy your choice of those. Thanks for listening.
Go. All right. Well, a couple other thank yous and a couple other places you can find us online. You can certainly, we would love it if you subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. You can also go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to all of our previous episodes, as well as links to all of the research that we discuss in these episodes. You can find us on all the socials as ABA Inside Track. And if you want even more ABA Inside Track content, including extra long book club episodes, a chance to vote on our kind of listener chosen episodes, discounts on CEs, as well as some free CEs, why not check us out at patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where for just $5 a month, you can get access to those polls and some of those discounts. And if you go up to $10 a month, you can get access to our extra long book club podcast. As of the release of this episode, we will soon have our summer book club choice out. It was a loser bracket. Which one won? We don't actually know at the time of recording, but you'll know and you'll be able to listen to it if you subscribe right now at patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where
Hopefully,
you can hear the whole thing and get 2 CEs for no charge.
hopefully you chose wisely.
Yeah, well, and if you're just hearing this and you're like, I better go sign up, it's not your fault. We don't blame you. We know you didn't get a chance to vote on this. But if you already were signed up, what were you thinking? Come on, really? We loved that book or didn't like that book. Fill in the blank, whichever one it was.
That's going to be great.
It's going to be great.
We always have a good time in book club.
We do. We also want to say a big thank you to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. Oh, wait! Don't forget, we've got our last secret code word, and this is a special guest secret code word. It is Louie, Louie. It is the name of one of Dr. Gover's cats, who we're promised we're going to get a picture. Apparently, we're very enamored of her podcast setup before she began recording, and we're enjoying hanging out with all the recording equipment. So that brings us to
the cats were.
The cats were enamored.
I see.
Yes, Dr. Gover also seemed to really enjoy her podcast equipment. Maybe not as much as the cats, but we all had a great time talking using that equipment.
Okay.
All right.
Did you spell that?
Louie,
Oh, okay.
Louie.
I think you did.
Yes. All right, folks, we'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.